The morning sun filtered weakly through the marble columns of the Montclair estate, casting slanting beams across the grand foyer where silence reigned like a king. Everything was as it always was. Immaculate, precise, unervingly still. But something felt wrong. The air, though perfumed and expensive, had a weight to it that clung to the lungs like dread. Silas Marlowe stood by the stairwell, his charcoal suit tailored to perfection, his wristwatch ticking like a metronome to the rhythm of his empire. On any other morning, he would have walked out the door without hesitation, confident, untouchable. But this morning, this peculiar morning, he hesitated. She was on her knees. "Sir, please. Don't go." Her voice was soft but fractured, like glass under pressure. Dupe's eyes were wide, not with fear, but something more primal, raw premonition. The hem of her faded uniform grazed the marble as she knelt, her fingers trembling against the polished floor. Her skin, dark and worn from years of hardship, shimmered with the sweat of worry. "I saw it," she said, her voice nearly a whisper, but vibrating with something ancient. "I saw you die. On the highway. A silver van crashes into you. Your car flips your head. Sir, please don't go." Silas froze. He looked down at her, startled, not by the content of her words, but by the sheer desperation with which she delivered them. Dupe, the quiet one. The girl from Lagos who barely spoke above a murmur, who never asked for more than she was given, who had never, in all her time there, raised her voice until now. Behind them, stilettos clicked on marble. Maria. She was already dressed in her lemon silk robe, the kind that only served to flaunt her comfort while the world worked for her. She took one look at Dupe on the floor and let out a scornful laugh that could slice glass. "Oh, for God's sake, Silas," she said, arms crossed, lip curled. "This again. Are we seriously indulging village fairy tales before breakfast?" Dupe didn't move. Her eyes didn't even flicker at Mariah's voice. She kept her gaze on Silas, as though trying to reach past his reason, to some place deeper, older. "I don't want your money," she whispered. "I don't want anything. But I saw blood. Your blood. You won't come back if you go today." Silas swallowed. The rational part of his mind, the one that built Crestrock Group from the ground up, scoffed at the idea of omens. Dreams were chemical reactions, nothing more. But the look in her eyes. It wasn't madness. It was mourning. As though she had already lost him. Mariah laughed again, sharper now. "You seriously aren't buying this, are you? Cancel the board meeting because the help had a nightmare." Silas. "This is embarrassing." Silas turned toward the door. The driver would be waiting outside. The contract, the billion-dollar merger, was sitting in his briefcase, begging for a signature. But he couldn't shake it. Dupe was still kneeling, her lips moving now in silent prayer. Prayer for him. He looked down at her once more, then back at Mariah, whose glare now carried a tinge of panic, perhaps because she'd never seen him hesitate before. Power trembles in the presence of uncertainty. Something inside him turned. Not fear. Instinct. "Tell the driver to go without me," he said at last. Mariah blinked. "What?" "I'm staying. Reschedule the meeting. Tell them something came up." Silas walked away from the door without another word. Behind him, Mariah's mouth opened, stunned into silence, while Dupe exhaled, her hands still clasped in quiet gratitude. Somewhere outside, the engine of the black Mercedes purred to life and pulled into motion without him. 3 hours later, it was wrapped around a tree on Route 31. The driver was in critical condition, and the silver van that hit them had vanished into the woods without a trace. Silas never said a word to Dupe that day. But from that moment on, he started watching her the way a man watches the only candle in a dark room, unwilling to admit he believes in the light, but terrified of what would happen if it went out. The news broke like thunder through the corridors of the Montclair estate. Silas stood in his study, the mahogany walls closing in like a mausoleum, the scent of old books and polished wood suffocatingly present. On the television screen mounted above the fireplace, the image of the wreck played on a loop, a twisted heap of metal where a car used to be. A black Mercedes, crushed beyond recognition. The driver's blood-streaked face blurred out. But the timestamp said enough. 8:47 a.m. Exactly when he would have been there. Exactly when Dupe had warned him. He stared at the screen in silence. Around him the room was still, but his mind was not. Every click of the clock on the wall felt like a countdown he had narrowly escaped. The same voice that once dismissed her dream now replayed it word for word. A silver van. The car flipping. His head hitting glass. Blood. He hadn't told anyone. Not the police, not Mariah, not even his assistant about the dream. Felt too fragile, too surreal. And yet, here it was, manifest in metal and pain and coincidence that didn't feel like coincidence anymore. Mariah was in the solarium when she got the call from the hospital. The driver had survived, but just barely. Skull fractures. Broken ribs. Punctured lung. He was lucky, they said. But luck is just a name for the things we can't explain. She stormed into his study. Her expression brittle with a mixture of fear and pride, too proud to admit it had been wrong. "I suppose you think this proves something," she said. Silas didn't answer. He was watching the footage again. His reflection flickered on the screen. Dark, motionless, as if a part of him had died in that car. The part that trusted only logic. "She knew," he said finally. His voice was low, as though he feared the house itself might be listening. "She saw it before it happened." "Mariah. How do you explain that?" Mariah laughed, but it cracked under the weight of doubt. "Coincidence. That's all. She's from some village, they believe in spirits, omens, whatever. She got lucky." He turned to face her. It wasn't luck. She was crying, begging. She described details that. "It's manipulation," Mariah snapped louder now. "She plays on your guilt. On your need to feel. I don't know, human. Like you're still connected to people like her. That doesn't make it real." Silas stared at her, and in that moment something shifted. Something invisible but permanent. Fracture. Maybe not in love but in belief. She had seen a life almost lost, and couldn't bring herself to wonder why it wasn't. That kind of coldness had always been there. But now it had a name. He left her standing there, words still burning in her throat, and went to the servants' quarters. It was the first time he'd stepped inside them. A narrow hallway, walls faded from years of unnoticed living. He knocked softly on Dupe's door. She opened it within seconds, as though she'd been waiting. Her eyes searched his face, and when she saw what was written there, confirmation, not disbelief, her hands dropped to her sides, and the tight line of her jaw softened. "You stayed," she said. "I prayed you would." "I did," he murmured. "And I saw the crash on the news." She nodded once, then turned away, leaving the door open. He followed her inside. The room was small, Spartan, lived in. On the bedside table sat a wooden cross, a faded photo of a young boy, and a cracked mug that read, "Blessed beyond measure." There was no pretense here. Just survival stitched together with faith. "How long have you had these dreams?" he asked, voice quiet. Dupe sat on the edge of the bed. Her hands folded in her lap. "Since I was a child. But not always. Only when something's near. When death is coming close. I don't ask for them. They just come. And you saw me. I saw more than just you. I saw darkness behind you. Like a shadow following too closely. It's not just the crash, sir. That was only the beginning." Silas felt something slide down his spine, cold and ancient. "You think someone's trying to hurt me?" "I think someone already is," she whispered. "And they're close. Someone you let into your life. Someone you trust." The air in the room thickened. His mind immediately went to names. Partners. Friends. His wife. "I need to know," he said, his voice low. "If you see anything else, anything at all, you come to me. Directly. No matter the time." Dupe nodded. He stood to leave, but then paused at the door. He turned back to her, the woman who had saved his life with a dream. Not because she had to, but because she couldn't not. "Thank you," he said. It was the first time he had ever said it to her. But it wouldn't be the last. As he stepped back into the grand corridor of his estate, everything looked the same. Gilded, hollow, perfect. But behind the walls, a storm was stirring. One he could no longer afford to ignore. And dupe. She had seen its eye before anyone else. Silas woke the next morning in a bed that felt more like a stage. Every thread count in the sheets a line rehearsed, every feather in the pillows arranged with the precision of someone trying too hard to appear effortless. Mariah lay beside him, motionless, her back turned as if even in sleep, she needed distance. Her breathing was steady, but shallow, like someone surviving rather than resting. He stared at the ceiling for a long time. The chandelier above, a grand cascade of Austrian crystals, caught the light from the morning sun, refracting it in 1,000 directions. Beautiful, yes, but cold, lifeless, much like everything they'd built. They used to laugh here. Once. When the house was new, when money still held the scent of dreams rather than the stench of obligation. But that laughter had decayed into silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the one that suffocates. And he didn't know when it had started. Only that now it was everywhere. At breakfast, Mariah sat across the long dining table with her phone in one hand and a smoothie in the other. Her eyes never rose to meet his. "You're quiet," she said. "So are you." She looked up then, but her expression was unreadable. Perfectly curated. Still shaken from yesterday. More like awake for the first time in a while. Mariah tilted her head slightly, like a cat watching something squirm. "Because the maid had a nightmare and saved your life. Because the dream was real," he said softly. "And because there's something broken in this house that no amount of money can fix." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't be dramatic, Silas." He let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "That's rich. Coming from a woman who once faked an anxiety attack to avoid dinner with my mother." "That was survival," she said sharply. "Your mother was a venomous old witch." Silas studied her. Her polished nails. Her designer robe. The flicker of something behind her eyes. Something calculating as always. "And this? What is this now?" "Survival too." Mariah leaned forward. "This is partnership, Silas. Merger. Presentation. You and we're more powerful together than apart. People envy us. They admire us. Do you really want to throw all of that away for dreams and gut feelings?" "I don't know what I want anymore," he admitted. "But I know this isn't it." For a moment, something like fear flickered across her face. But she recovered quickly. "You're emotional. The accident rattled you." "It did more than that. It exposed everything I've ignored. This marriage. These walls. You." Mariah's smile was tight. "Careful, Silas. You start pulling at threads, the whole thing unravels." "Maybe it should." He pushed back from the table, appetite gone, and walked away, leaving her in a room too large, too clean, too silent. In the days that followed, the tension thickened. They went through the motions, public appearances, charity galas, board meetings, but it was all choreography. Behind closed doors they spoke less, slept separately. Sometimes he'd find himself standing in front of the mirror, touching the scar on his temple, the one that wasn't there but felt like it should be. He watched Dupe more now. Not out of suspicion but reverence. She carried herself with humility, yet there was something powerful beneath her silence. Knowing. She watched him too, always with eyes that seemed to speak, "Be careful. You're not alone in your own home." One evening, as Silas returned from a late meeting, he overheard voices from the study. The door was slightly ajar. "He's asking questions now," Mariah whispered. A male voice responded. "Familiar. Then give him answers that lead nowhere. Keep him busy. Distracted." Silas stepped back into the shadows, heart pounding. The voice belonged to Adam. His childhood friend, now business partner. The man he had trusted for over a decade. The man who had stood beside him at his wedding. He left before they could see him. The hallway seemed longer than ever. The silence now screamed. Back in his room, he poured himself a drink with shaking hands. The whiskey burned, but not enough to dull the truth clawing its way into the open. He had married a stranger with a beautiful mask. He had built an empire on sand and lies. And now the tide was coming in. He sat by the window for a long time, watching the wind bend the trees in the dark. Somewhere below, in her small room, Dupe lit a candle and whispered a prayer in a language he couldn't understand, but felt somehow was meant for him. It was a prayer for protection, for clarity, for what comes next. Because whatever illusion his life had been, it was unraveling now, thread by golden thread. The night air was heavy with something unspeakable, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Silas couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the flicker of Adam's silhouette beside Mariah, heard the oily whisper of betrayal curling like smoke through the crack in the study door. He sat upright in bed, alone again, the sheets tangled and damp with sweat. The house, so grand and pristine by day, now felt like a mausoleum. Shadows stretched longer here. Silence wasn't quiet, it pulsed. Around 3:17 a.m., something shifted. A low creak outside his door, deliberate and slow. Then a knock, not loud but urgent. He opened the door to find Dupe standing barefoot in the hallway, wrapped in a thin shawl, her eyes wide, dark, glistening. "Sir, I saw it again," she whispered. His stomach dropped. "Another dream." She nodded, stepping in only when he gestured. It was worse this time. He led her to the lounge off the master bedroom, poured her warm water, but she didn't touch it. Her hands were clenched, and she stared at a point far beyond the room. "I saw blood," she said. "Not just yours. Hers too. But you first." They were laughing. But it wasn't a laugh of joy. It was sharp, cruel. "You were lying on the marble floor beneath the stairs. Open. Still." Silas exhaled, slow and shaky. "Mariah." Dupe's voice softened. She was dressed in white. Too white. "She stepped over your body without looking back." Adam was on the phone, talking to someone. It felt like business. The room spun slightly, though nothing moved. He sat down heavily. "Did you see how it happened?" Dupe shook her head. "Only what came after. But I heard something. 3 words. Make it clean." Silas's hands gripped the armrest. "You're sure?" "I never forget my dreams, sir." "Not these. They're not dreams. They're warnings." For a moment neither spoke. The house groaned softly in its bones. Clock ticked. Far off, a dog barked once, then silence again. Dupe finally looked up, her voice trembling. "You must not eat anything she gives you. You must not sign anything. And if she touches you, don't let her linger. There is something in her eyes now. Something that wasn't there before." Silas was too still, like a man staring over the edge of a cliff and realizing there's no ground below. He remembered the odd taste of the wine she'd poured 2 nights ago. The stiffness in his chest that had come and gone. The sudden migraines, dismissed as stress. "Why would they do it?" he whispered. "Why kill me now after all these years?" Dupe's answer came slowly. "Because you've started seeing the truth. And they think you're ready to act. You're not a pawn anymore." He looked up at her, his voice a rasp. "Why are you helping me?" She didn't hesitate. "Because I knew your mother. I worked for her when you were still a boy. And before she died she made me promise, if the house ever turned cold, if your eyes ever lost their fire, I'd find a way to bring you back." He stared at her, stunned. "You knew her." "I did. She saw through people. She saw through Mariah. She never trusted Adam." Silas's heart throbbed with a mixture of pain and awe. All this time he thought he was alone. Drift. But someone had been watching, quietly, loyally, waiting for the right moment. Dupe stood. "You have to pretend now. Pretend you know nothing. Male. Kiss her cheek. Go to the galas. But never let them see you flinch. What if it's already too late?" She placed a hand briefly on his shoulder. It's not. Not yet. But you must act soon. There's a third dream coming. He swallowed hard. A third? She nodded. And in that one, you're not the only one who dies. The candle she carried flickered as she walked out, leaving Silas alone in the dim room that suddenly felt like the center of a ticking clock. Every second that passed was no longer neutral, it was a warning. He returned to the window, but this time he didn't look out to escape. He looked out to prepare. Because the dream wasn't just a vision. It was a map. And he had just been handed the first piece. The morning after Dupe's second warning felt different. The sunlight that poured through the windows no longer felt warm. It was clinical, too sharp, like a scalpel exposing raw truth. Silas walked through the mansion like a ghost retracing his own footsteps, noticing what he had ignored for far too long. How Mariah no longer looked him in the eye when she smiled. How Adam's presence was always followed by silences that didn't belong in friendship. He no longer questioned the unease. He wore it like a second skin. The day passed in careful observation. No confrontation, no sudden moves, just watching. Listening. Pretending. Then, late in the evening, Silas entered his private study under the pretense of reviewing business contracts. He locked the door, lowered the blinds, and turned off the overhead lights. The soft glow from his antique desk lamp made the gold-trimmed frames of old family photographs shimmer, as if the past itself was watching. He opened his laptop and accessed the home's security footage. He had never bothered with it before. The house was meant to be a fortress. Sacred. But as the files loaded, he realized how naive that assumption had been. First, nothing unusual. Always. Gardens. Foyer. Then, a clip from 3 nights ago caught his attention. Mariah in the kitchen, late, alone. She wasn't cooking. She was speaking on the phone, her tone hushed but firm. He increased the audio. No, I've already started reducing the dosage. Yes, I know how much. I'm not stupid, Adam. You think I want him dead before the will's in place. The breath caught in Silas's throat. He leaned in. We'll do it next week. The gala's the perfect distraction. Everyone will think it was the stress. We'll cry. You'll comfort. No one will question it. Silas froze. His ears buzzed. His vision narrowed. There was no longer space for doubt. It wasn't just paranoia or Dupe's dreams. It was real. Tangible. A plan measured and rehearsed. He scrubbed forward. More clips. More pieces. Adam entering the house without ringing the bell. He had a key. Mariah greeting him with a kiss. Not polite, not friendly. Intimate. Her arms around his neck, his hand on her lower back, her breath on his cheek. Months, no years, of betrayal playing out beneath the roof Silas had built. He stared at the screen, the images blurring through the rage rising like bile in his throat. His fists clenched. His temples throbbed. But even now, with the knife of betrayal pressed to his heart, he did not scream. He did not cry. He simply sat, silent, breaking, beneath the weight of a truth too cruel to speak aloud. They had planned it all. The love, the loyalty, the companionship. Silas thought of every anniversary toast, every whispered promise in the dark, every time Adam called him brother. Each memory now twisted, darkened, corrupted. He reached into the drawer and pulled out an old photograph. His wedding day. He stared at it. Young Mariah. Smiling. A different kind of smile. One he used to believe in. He stared so long it hurt. Then he ripped it in half. Not out of anger but ceremony. A funeral for what he once believed. The betrayal wasn't just theirs. It was his own blindness. His desperate need to believe in something beautiful, even after it had turned to rot. That was the deepest cut of all. The next day, he walked into the dining room with a smile. He kissed Mariah on the cheek. He clapped Adam on the shoulder. He poured the wine himself. And in the quiet chamber of his soul, Silas made a vow. If they wanted to play games, they would soon learn they had chosen the wrong opponent. Because now, he had seen the monster behind the mirror. And he would not go down quietly. There are silences that heal and silences that rot. The one between Silas and Mariah was of the latter kind, thick, metallic, and crawling just beneath the surface of every word they exchanged. After the night he discovered the truth, the voices, the kiss, the plan, Silas began wearing a different face. Controlled, cordial. But behind his eyes was a growing tempest, one Mariah could sense but not quite see. She grew cautious, as if she too had begun to suspect that the performance they had curated for years was starting to fracture. "Are you feeling better today?" she asked one morning as he stirred his coffee in the kitchen. Her voice was light, but her eyes lingered too long. Silas smiled. "Much. I think the worst is behind me." She offered a nod, but her fingers tightened slightly around the handle of her cup. "You've been distant lately. Quieter. I've had a lot on my mind." Mariah crossed her arms. "You used to talk to me." "Did I?" The response was soft, almost too soft. He met her gaze evenly, his tone wrapped in something too polite to be real. "Maybe I just finally learned to listen." There it was. Subtle shift. She tilted her head, her mouth parting just slightly as if to ask something more. But she didn't. Instead, she turned away and changed the subject. "Don't forget the gala's in 4 days. Everything needs to be perfect." "Oh, it will be," Silas said. "I'm planning something unforgettable." She looked at him again, and something in her eyes flickered. Nervousness or doubt, he wasn't sure. But it was the first crack in her porcelain facade. And he relished it. In the following days, their interactions became a quiet chess match. He would step into a room she thought he wouldn't. She would close a laptop too quickly. Conversations that used to flow now stumbled over hollow laughter and polite misdirections. One evening, as they dressed for dinner with investors, the mask slipped, if only for a moment. "I spoke to Adam today," Mariah said casually, fastening an earring. "He said he might come by tomorrow. Wants to talk about the Morocco deal." Silas adjusted his cufflinks. "Strange. He already spoke to me about it this morning." Mariah paused mid-motion. "Oh, must have slipped his mind. Or perhaps he's forgetting which one of us he's lying to." The words came out before he could soften them. Or maybe he didn't want to. Her head turned slowly toward him. "What's that supposed to mean?" Silas smiled tightly. "Nothing. Just tired of repeating myself." But Mariah's posture had changed. Her voice dipped lower. "Silas, are you accusing me of something?" He stepped toward her, not aggressively, but with the calm intensity of a man who had nothing left to lose. "Should I be?" Her face twitched. Just a flicker. Then she laughed. Too sharp, too hollow. "You're being ridiculous." "Am I?" He leaned closer. "You know what's funny, Mariah? I used to think I couldn't live without you. Now I realize I was never truly living with you." For a split second, her eyes glistened with something that almost looked like rage or fear. "You think you're so clever," she whispered. "But you don't know everything, Silas. You never did." "Then enlighten me," he said, voice low. "What exactly have I missed, wife?" She looked at him long and cold. "You're slipping, Silas. Everyone sees it. You forget things. You wander. You're unstable." He held her gaze. "Is that what you're telling people? I don't need to. You do a fine job of it yourself." Silas nodded slowly, the pit in his stomach turning to stone. "Good. Keep thinking that." He walked away before the conversation could end with more venom. But he heard her breath catch, just faintly, and knew she felt the shift. The ground beneath her perfect world was no longer solid. Upstairs, in his private study, Silas opened the hidden drawer behind the bookshelf and pulled out a small digital recorder. He'd slipped it under the vase in the hallway where Mariah took most of her calls. The newest file was already marked with a date and timestamp. He clicked play. Her voice, low and clipped. "Yes, he's getting suspicious. I can see it in the way he looks at me. But don't worry, he won't do anything. Not until it's too late." Then Adam's voice, clearer than before. Make sure of it. And don't forget the pills. This time, double the dose. Silas closed the recorder, sat back in his chair, and exhaled. The web was tightening. But not around him. Around them. The night of the gala arrived draped in elegance and deception. Beneath the glittering chandeliers and the polished civility of polite society, something colder stirred. A presence beneath the surface, something vast, like an unseen predator just under the water. Silas moved through the room like a ghost wearing a tailored tuxedo, smiling, shaking hands, murmuring pleasantries he didn't mean. All the while he watched. Mariah was radiant as always. Dressed in a wine-colored gown that clung to her like a secret, she played the gracious hostess with impeccable ease, laughing when necessary, kissing cheeks, toasting to futures she had no intention of honoring. Silas had long admired her ability to lie without flinching. But tonight, her performance carried the faint shimmer of desperation. He noticed it in the way her eyes darted every time someone mentioned his name. In how her smile tightened at the edges when an old friend of his approached. She was losing control of the narrative, and she knew it. Then came the unexpected. As Silas stood near the bar, a man he didn't recognize approached him. Tall, salt and pepper hair, expensive but understated suit, the kind of presence that didn't announce itself but refused to be ignored. "Mr. Silas Ward," the man said, voice smooth as aged scotch. "It's a pleasure. I've been wanting to meet you for quite some time." Silas extended a hand, instinctively alert. "Have we met?" "Not formally. My name is Everett Langford. I'm with the Paragon Initiative." Something cold prickled at the base of Silas's neck. The name sounded familiar, but not from his circles. Not from real estate. This was older, deeper. Something whispered at high-stakes tables in guarded tones. Everett leaned in just slightly, his tone softening. "You've made some interesting enemies, Mr. Ward. Some of them share mutual interests with people like us." Silas narrowed his eyes. "I don't believe I follow." "No," Everett said with a ghost of a smile. "But you will." Before Silas could respond, Mariah appeared beside him. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Darling," she said with effortless warmth, slipping her arm through his. "Are you enjoying yourself?" Everett gave her a nod, but his gaze remained on Silas. "A lovely event. But as I said, Mr. Ward, our paths will cross again. Very soon." And then he disappeared into the crowd, like a shadow that had never truly been there. Later, in the quiet of his study, Silas replayed the interaction over and over. Something about Everett's words didn't sit right. Mutual interest, enemies, and the Paragon Initiative. Why did that name feel like an echo from a life he hadn't known he was living? He opened his laptop and began searching. Paragon wasn't just a think tank, as its polished website suggested. It was a network. Old money. Quiet power. They didn't buy companies. They orchestrated collapses, then rescued them from the ashes. Politics, finance, pharmaceuticals, data. And now real estate. Or maybe something else. A particular article caught his eye, one referencing a string of CEO resignations tied to wellness initiatives and mental instability. The connections were paper-thin, the kind you'd only notice if you knew what to look for. But Silas knew. It wasn't just Mariah and Adam. They were small players. Disposable. There was something larger behind this machine. And Silas. He was the target. Or the key. Perhaps both. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of everything settling in like fog. Dupe's dreams, the pills, the surveillance, Everett's cryptic warning. It wasn't a marriage falling apart anymore. It was a trap carefully constructed over years. A design in which Silas had been both architect and pawn. But now that he could see the lines, he knew what had to come next. He wouldn't just escape the game. He'd dismantle it from the inside.